Historically, the African continent is not short of instances of autocratic regimes that have all authored many of the darkest memoirs of African geopolitics, marked by horror, terror, chaos, and bloodshed. Standing out from his fellow autocrats in many respects, Eritrea's President Afewerki's 28 years despotic authoritarianism in personalizing state power with merciless political strategies and abusive policies inscribes one of the most brutal and deplorable chapters in the history of humanity. These developments have led to Eritrea being called the North Korea of Africa for, among other reasons, torturing and imprisoning thousands and committing systematic, ongoing extermination of some of its critics and defectors. But how did all of this come to be? To understand the matter, let's first of all review Eritrea's background. Eritrea is a tiny country nestled between Sudan, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and the Red Sea, and thus occupies an important strategic location in the world. Technically, the country's story begins with its struggle for independence from Ethiopia, a battle that kicked off in the 1960s and didn't call it quits until 1991. In April 1993, Afewerki was elected as the first president of the state of Eritrea by the National Assembly. Since then, to date, Eritrea remains a unitary one-party presidential republic, a one-man dictatorship under President Afewerki's totalitarian rule, with no elected legislature, an independent judiciary, or other democratic state institutions. Fast forward to the post-independence era, and Eritrea found itself in another conflict, this time with Ethiopia, from the 1998s to the 2010s. As a result, President Isaias Afewerki repressed, Western-style, democracy and has since ruled with iron fist. Now, Eritrea has been compared to some heavyweights like Cuba and the former East Germany, but no title has stuck more than Africa's North Korea. So let's undertake a comparison with North Korea. Political system. Eritrea is a land where the political stage is dominated by one party, the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, PFDJ, which has been steering the ship in both political and civilian domains. This draws parallels to an authoritarian state such as North Korea, since both are one-party states whose rulers rule with an iron grip and have a knack for stifling dissent. Further, Eritrea's main man, President Isaias Afewerki, has been at the helm since independence in 1993. Throughout that period, critics were shut down, and the masses were forced to be loyal to the president. Similarly, over in North Korea, the Kim family dynasty has been running the show for generations by passing leadership down the family tree. Notably, both Eritrea and North Korea have this uncanny knack for locking horns with critics, with those who criticize the government being thrown in the slammer or, in more extreme cases, facing death row. Moreover, Eritrea's decade-long feud with Ethiopia has resulted in an invisible border turned into an iron curtain. Throughout this period, Eritrea, much like North Korea, morphed into a military state with conscription into the army for a lifelong commitment. The UN calls it forced labor, some even say slavery, since to leave, you'll need an exit permit, and conscripts almost never get the green light that sparks human rights concerns. In Eritrea, there's this heavy cloud of restrictions hovering over freedom of speech, the press, and political dissent. Imagine a place where you can't speak your mind without looking over your shoulder. Yeah, that's the reality for Eritreans. That's not all. Eritreans face grave human rights violations, from enforced disappearances, torture, and arbitrary detention. Consequently, the global community, including the UN, has been waving red flags about the rampant, systematic violence orchestrated by the Eritrean government, which includes arbitrary arrests and incommunicado detentions under brutal conditions. Further, Eritrea holds the dubious title of being one of only 3 countries putting extreme constraints on humanitarian assistance to its own people. And this has led to the development of a dire situation where the population is left hanging by a thread. For example, a mandatory system of indefinite conscription, a system so oppressive that even young schoolchildren aren't spared, which involves torture, purposeful rape, sexual servitude, violence, and forced labor, is one of the many trifecta of horrors. This has resulted in Eritrea becoming ranked 178 in the Global Press Freedom Index. It sits just ahead of North Korea and Turkmenistan, making it the only African country with no privately owned news media. In fact, Eritrea has imprisoned the fourth highest number of journalists globally, right after Turkey, China, and Egypt, and their whereabouts are a chilling mystery. Besides, even with peace agreements and diplomatic shifts, Eritrea's commitment to human rights and civil liberties hasn't seen a makeover, as throughout his stay in power, President Afewerki continues to use the absence of peace with Ethiopia to justify his authoritarian government, which leads to the development of strained international relations. Now, let's clear the air right off. Eritrea isn't North Korea, and here's why: it's less repressive, doesn't wield nuclear weapons, and isn't flexing muscles as an existential threat. Sure, both Eritrea and North Korea have faced the UN sanctions, but the devil is in the details. Eritrea is under an arms embargo, travel bans on leaders, and some frozen assets due to some accusations dating back to 2009 claiming Eritrea supported Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Fast forward to 2021, and the United States dropped financial sanctions on Eritrea's ruling party, the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, and a few key players, citing the humanitarian and human rights crises in Eritrea. Furthermore, both regimes are isolationist, but Eritrea is not a total hermit. As of late, it's been cozying up to the European Union, letting UN agencies set up shop, and building ties with Gulf states like the United Arab Emirates. Also, Eritreans have more room to breathe compared to their North Korean counterparts, as both satellite TV and the internet, though they might be slower, are apparently uncensored. Besides, Eritrean expats can come and go as long as they toe the party line and pay a diaspora tax. Moreover, Eritrea may not be a party to some international human rights treaties, but it's not a complete no-show, as it's ratified the UN covenants on civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights, and they've embraced 8 International Labour Organization conventions in 2020, including the one against forced labor. Is there a potential for change? The ongoing Europe's migration crisis and the Yemen conflict have become windows of opportunity for Eritrea. As a result, the European Union and Gulf Arab states have started to seek to normalize their relations with Eritrea, which also sits in a strategic position along busy Red Sea shipping lanes. Further, Eritrea is reaching out, building bridges with Saudi Arabia, and letting the UAE use logistical facilities like the Asab port. Although it's a start, this represents a shift from the go-it-alone attitude Eritrea has worn for decades. Moreover, the recent signing of the peace accord with Ethiopia in 2018 is like a breath of fresh air, potentially opening doors for Eritrea to unwind national service, reduce it to a more reasonable 18 months, and bid farewell to the oldest recruits, some pushing their 50s and 60s. Besides, there's talk of the private sector stepping into the spotlight and playing a more significant role in Eritrea's economy, and therefore, Eritrea's government, which once justified repressive policies as a response to the Ethiopian threat, might be steering the ship in a different direction. Thanks for joining us. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.